Tonight we're going to go over the second and third woe. Now, I know we did this last week, but I skimmed over it because I wanted to get to the witnesses. And having done most of that, maybe we'll do a little more tonight. I wanted to talk about the woman wrapped in the sun with the moon under her feet. And so that's where I'm going with this tonight. But I'm going to start with chapter 11. And if you want to, you can read along with what I've got on the screen if it's there. Or you can take a look at your favorite translation and just see how different this is. And it has big differences in a couple places. In fact, I found the same word that Paul uses that's translated rapture. I found that same one here in this text today. So that was pretty exciting. So we start here, chapter 11. We'll read quickly through this part. And someone gave me a reed similar to a rod, saying, "Get up and measure the shrine of the Elohim and the altar and those bowing down in it." Well, one thing, this bowing down, any place you see anywhere in the New Testament where it says worshiped, this is what it's talking about. Bowing down, not raising hands in the air unless it says that, not singing a hymn, those kind of things that we think of as worship. Worship was quite different in that time. And the worship, when people were allowed in, which wasn't often, you think of all Israel coming into the temple, not often. Their festivities were outside in the profane courts. However, the king and the higher authorities of the nation were in the worship, and these worshiping times were very well orchestrated. They were also a kind of entertainment, we would say, because we had the Levites in there who had rehearsed and rehearsed all week, had their instruments in there, kitharas, not harps, kitharas in there. And they certainly had those kind of programs going on, as was the speaking parts. They used the same thing every time, with the exception of possibly using something similar to the Torah portions that we use today, or Jews use today, but I don't think they even use them because there's no mention of that at all. When we get to Nazareth, when Yeshua walks into the synagogue there, before he is identified, then he picks up the Haftorah to read, the prophet, and he gives a little dissertation from Isaiah. I think it's 40 or somewhere in there, 40 maybe, probably not. And that's all we know about it, really. So here we have bowing down. Think of it that way. Or I use the word reverence in those places because that's another word. Well, it literally means bowing down or bending the knee. It's another place where worshiping at that time was primarily a spectator sport. The people that weren't priests that were in there, all they did really was sit and listen, with the exception of perhaps some responsive readings, like in the synagogue. So, all right, get up and measure the shrine of the Elohim. I'm giving you a reed similar to a rod. And measure the altar and measure the people that happen to be in there. Now, this is not the whole temple. And your Bible is going to say the temple. But when you look at this word, neon, it speaks of the holiest place. You know, where the Ark of the Covenant is, where the showbread is, where the menorah is. That is the only place it's speaking of. And again, that word is neon, but it to read it in any Bible, it makes you think that the whole temple was measured. Not at all. Just that little room, the Holy of Holies that holds the stuff. And at this time, remember that Holy of Holies, that neon was full of corpses, clear to the top, full of corpses. Because I believe at that time it was Eleazar that was in charge of the temple, who was a temple policeman and the head of them. And there was no place else to put everything but in there. Of course, that had to be pretty much a secret because that's defiling. It's defiled. So here we've got a little talk about that, because he says regarding the outer yard of the shrine outside the neon, cast it outside. Don't measure it, for it's been given to foreigners, ethnoi, and they'll trample the Kadosh city for 42 months. We've already talked about that time element. And I'll give authority to my two witnesses. The word authority is not in there. I'll give something to my two witnesses. I suppose that would be authority, or it might be inspiration, or it might be anointing. We don't know because nothing's there. And they'll prophesy for 1,260 days, the same amount, wrapped in sackcloth. I think you know the meaning of sackcloth. It is, in a minute. I want to see if I could fix something here. That's the wrong size. Sackcloth, like Job or like Ezekiel, they wrap up in this cloth that is very rough. It makes me think of, I use a kind of a rough towel thing. It's not a towel, but I use it to scrub my back when I'm taking a shower, and it is really rough. It scrapes all the dead skin off of there. And I thought today, I don't want to be wearing this kind of wrap or this kind of cloth because it is so coarse, but it works so well. They do this to show themselves as being tortured. Same reason they throw ashes on themselves, etc. They'll prophesy for 1,260 days wrapped in sackcloth. And these are the two olive trees and the two lanterns, the one standing before the sovereign of the earth. You don't find this too often, except in the Nazarene Acts. They talk about it to a great extent, and that is standing before Elohim. And why they use that is because of, let's see, Jeremiah speaking of the Rechabites. Last time we talked a little about a Rechabite priest, I think, or maybe it was Shabbat, in the life of James the Just, how he had been cast off the parapet of the temple, and a Rechabite priest happened to come up, which is who is identified in another place as his brother or cousin, there Simon Zelotes. And so let's see, what was I talking about? The standing man is described in the Nazarene Acts as a special place before Elohim, where somebody stands, and because that somebody stood there and Yahweh brings them there to stand, there is a protection over their family, over their blood kin from then on. Like there is a standing man spoken of as Pincus in the Old Testament, and the Rechabite, the head Rechabite. Now I can't think. Oh, of course, his name is Rechab. Rechab. He is standing before Elohim and his family. Well, I think what was told him by Elohim was that you'll always have one of you guys before me. You'll always have that. So we see here 3, 6, 700 years later, we still have these Rechabites. They drink no wine. They wouldn't build houses. They were nomads, Bedouins. They made their living from the desert. They ate what they found, and they were very pious. They did good deeds. So here are the Rechabites and what they did in that particular place. Well, I know what Pincus did or Phineas did is that he killed somebody. But I can't remember right now what the Rechabites did, but you can look that up in Jeremiah. So they prophesied, and these are the 2 olive trees and the 2 lanterns. What we need to do to find out who they are, I think the main thing is that we need to go to the book of Zechariah, which is an unusual thing. It's an Old Testament apocrypha that tells us a little something about the future, but also the present. And chapters, especially, I believe, 4 through 6 or beyond, talks about the 2 olive trees and the lanterns, and who are they? It identifies them. And we touched on this last week, but one of them was a kingly type, and his name was Zerubbabel. And the other one's name was Joshua, who was the high priest. So we've got the king and the priest here that are the olive trees and the 2 lanterns. And undoubtedly, what the Revelator is doing is pointing us in that direction. Now, if that's what he's doing, then it wouldn't be Moses and Elijah. Whether they lived or died, I mean, Moses dies. They're not alive forever. They can't be alive forever. People aren't alive forever. Or Enoch and Elijah, who at certain points in their story appear that they didn't die. But again, in 2nd Enoch, you can see that they did. What it means when Melchizedek is said to have no genealogy, that means that his parents died before he was born. He had no mother and father because they died. The mother died in childbirth and the father died during the pregnancy. And that too is told in another place. So when people are trying to exegete the book of Hebrews or the letter to the Hebrews, let's remember this is to the Hebrews, not to them and their notions. The reason that he has no genealogy is because both his parents died before he was born or in birth. 2 olive trees, the 2 lanterns. So here we've got just a clue. Just a clue. And it might be, if this is all supposed to be in the future, it might be that these people are going to be identified, but it's not in the future. And you can be sure that the holy ones, the Kedoshim, at the time knew exactly who they were. Of course they did. This is what John does, or Yeshua, whoever wrote this, he hides the identity of people, knowing that if he identifies people in here and the Romans get to reading this and figuring it out, then they'll have somebody. They'll come and pick them up, and that'll be the end of it. Yes, I'm reading again that fiction, The Last Disciple, I think it's called. It's a fiction in 3 parts, 3 books. I just couldn't get it to make sense because I read the books out of order. But those 3 books really have to do with the revelation being circulated in at the time it was written, being circulated around, and the Romans trying with great effort to figure out what those passages meant. I think it was probably like that. It makes me think also that, again, that these letters, these visions, these prophecies were serialized and sent out piece by piece, not only because we find them serialized in some of the old texts that we have, but also because I can't see that he could get this all written and have it out before these things happen. So either he's done this afterwards or he's done this before in pieces. Certainly, I look at, for instance, chapter 10 and chapter 11. Those are 2 different visions, one of a colossus, the other of the woman up in the sky. They have nothing to do with each other, but there are a lot of places where there is no fashion chronology in these chapters, in these visions, to make you think that they were in order. They are not. That makes it a little harder to figure out. The ones standing before the sovereign of the earth, standing men, they would know who those were, certainly. And we have Nazarene Acts telling us who standing men were, and one of those was James. But I don't think he was standing at this time. I believe he had been martyred. I think it was in 62. But Josephus says in a lost text that it was because of James' martyrdom that the war even began. It was on account of the people were so mad about that. And the source we get that from is a good source. Just haven't found that piece of the material yet. If anyone wants to do them harm, fire goes out of their mouth, singular, and consumes their enemies. And if anybody wants to do them further harm, it's necessary for him to be killed. Elohim's not going to put up with it. They're going to take those guys away if they continue and continue. And in the end, that's what happens. Fire from the mouth. I read a whole essay on what that could mean. But I think that you understand, like I do, that it's primarily with the sword of the word, the 2-edged sword. And in fact, I think it says so a little later on. And I'm going to skip 6 through 14 because we went through that pretty well last time. To 11. After the 3 days and a half, a breath of life out of Elohim entered into these guys. They were dead. They were there for 3 days and a half in the tomb. Maybe they went down to hell and preached to the spirits in prison. I don't know. We know Yahshua did that. I wonder if it wasn't Yahshua and James, those 2 brothers. I wouldn't doubt it, whether they were alive at this time or not. I wouldn't doubt if it was that other Jesus, son of Ananias, that went for 3 years there crying out, "Woe, woe, woe." And here we're in the process of the 2 woes, and there are 3 woes here. And we talked about him a lot last time because he ought to get a lot of talk, even though there's just very limited to tell us about that. And it says the people hated him. And that, remember, he was the one that got hit by the boulder that was flying over. And in that hour, there came to be a great quake, and the 10th of the city fell. That would be probably the outside wall. And 7,000 names of men were killed in the quake. and the remainder came to be terrified and rendered respect to the Elohim of the sky. Well, again, your Bible is going to say something like worshiped, but I am sure that these guys didn't worship Elohim. They would say something like, yes, this is a case where God is doing something. This has never been done before. A person could not do this. An army could never knock down the outer wall. So that's the second woe is past. Behold, the third woe comes quickly. Woe, woe, woe. And then we skip down to 15. I'm trying to get to Pella, the last trumpet. The seventh messenger blasted a silver trumpet, and there were loud voices in the sky saying, the sovereignty of the world has become that of Yahweh and his Mashiach. And he'll reign through ages of ages, long, long time. And the voice is heard in the 24 presbyters. This tells us that this is in a region that we can't see. There could not be a witness to this. This had to come through Yochanan being in spirit, in a spirit, and being somewhere that we can't go unless we're having a near-death experience, maybe, or Elohim takes us up, takes us someplace for a special revelation. Some of us have had those kind of revelations. I'd like to have one, but not as part of a near-death experience. I know my father had one of these before he died, but he wouldn't tell me anything. So the 24 presbyters, presbyter means overseer. Presby is sight. People that look over. Some have elders, Zakanim, which that would be all right. Actually, the Greek says presbyters, overseers, elders. Elders is more general, older people or those who have reached higher levels than most in the economy of the kingdom. They sit on their thrones before Elohim. They fall on their faces and reverenced Elohim. Now, these might be worshiping, but the same word is used, proskusin. And they're saying, we thank you, Yahweh, the Elohim, all-powerful, the one who is, and the one who was, and the one who's coming. You know, there is a coming throughout the Old Testament. There's a coming where Elohim is going to be ruler of the earth. The prophets talk about it. They don't say Messiah or the anointed one. They say Yahweh is coming to bodily rule the earth. And this is exactly what they're saying here. Again, mimicking the Old Testament. You would expect here that, especially in this text, that they'd have Yeshua coming. But are they trying to say that Yeshua and Yahweh are the same? Maybe. There's not a whole lot of evidence for that, but certainly those that believe in the Trinity is going to tell us that that's the evidence of it, I suppose. That your anger has also come, as has the time for the one, dead to be examined. That word there is trial, by the way. Kriasios. Going to be a trial, same as in John chapter 5 that I like to talk about. To be examined, they're going to have a trial. And 2, reward to be given to your slaves and prophets. Slaves here, why can't I remember that right now? Whenever you see servant, Almost every time you see servant in the New Testament, the actual word there is slaves. Slave. I wrote a song years ago, The Slave of Elohim. Elohim had his slaves, but if you had to have a master, what better master could you possibly have? Great benefits in that slavery. Your slaves, the prophets. Also, number 3, the Kadoshim, holy ones, or in the Bible's saints. I don't know why they use that term. Saints, holy ones, hagios is the word used. And to the 4, ones fearing your name. I wonder if that footnote is going to deal with what I want to here. Let's see. Yeah. In the New Testament and early Christian writings, this is a very important segment of Israel and even European society, the God-fearer. The Greek terms God-fearers and God-worshippers are used to indicate those pagans who attach themselves in varying degrees to Hellenistic Judaism without becoming full converts. Well, you know, Hellenistic Judaism was a little skewed. They did a lot of pagan things. And in the pagan assemblies, these Jews or God-fearers were not required to keep Torah. They were not required to give up their home gods. They were only required to come to on the Sabbath to the synagogues or whatever kind of meetings they had. But at home, they could be anything they wanted. And so many of the richer folks, Gentiles, foreigners at that time, who would like to keep their status with the Greek society, but they were intrigued with Judaism, and what their natural religion was, they should have been intrigued with it. Then they were called God-fearers. They could sit in the synagogue and they could be there and they could learn, and then they could act like hell any other time as long as they were there. So they're referred to primarily in the Gospel of Luke in 7, and more extensively in the Acts of the Apostles. And if you've ever heard that particular phrase, God-fearers, you probably got it from the Acts of the Apostles because it's pretty prevalent there. So now you know what that is when the Acts talk about God-fearers. Now, let me see, where did I leave off? Okay, right here. And the sky was opened concerning these rewards. The shrine of Elohim was seen. This is the holy place. Was seen. So we've got an edifice in the sky. We're going to see a lot more than that. And the Ark of the Covenant, here it spells it right out, was within his shrine. Is that out there in the court of the Gentiles? No. Is it in the court of the women or the court of the Israelites? No, it's not in the temple. It is in the holy little room. What was it? 10 feet by 10 feet by 10 feet? I can't remember for sure, but the Ark of the Covenant was seen in there by somebody. So that place could be identified because everyone knew what that was. And with lightning and noises and thunderings and quakes and large hailstones all coming to pass. And that brings us here to chapter 12, where I wanted to get tonight. Again, I think of this word neon and think about people who are qualified to study these verses And I read, sometimes I read some commentaries, not often, but the ones I've read and the ones in the footnotes in my Bibles, I can't understand why they translate it temple. It's completely offsetting because the temple's destroyed. Remember, the temple will be destroyed. That was the prophecy of Yeshua that everybody knows and reads. So why would a temple full of dead people by this time, full of corpses in the different courts, people starving to death, people eating stubble and eating their shoes and their shields in order to keep from dying and eating their children, why would that be considered to be taken up into the sky? Of course, the idea you're supposed to get is that Yahweh is retaining something that he considers too important to leave there, because these people are destroying the land, and he knows they're going to destroy that place too. He wants to retain something. The fact is, when back at the beginning of 11, when it talks about them measuring, they're only going to measure that little part. The rest of it, throw it out. It's full of unbelievers. It's full of foreigners. Foreign in this case doesn't so much mean what it does for us today, somebody that comes from Mexico. It means people that don't belong there, people that are not true worshipers, people that are God-fearers. What are they doing there? I think that was a good idea, a good design of the tabernacle to leave whoever wants to come in out. I thought many times in churches that I had, well, this would be a nice environment if these people would go away. There's always people in those places that the devil has sent in there with a mission to disrupt, a mission to rise to the top, to denigrate, to destroy the minister, to destroy the elders, to conquer the board of directors, try to be at the top. There's always those people, and they're in every congregation, and those are called tares. They're tares. So we see the Ark of the Covenant, and was the shrine was within, and all these different signs. Now, this passage, growing up in our household, my mother always had elderly women staying in the house. We had to get a big house because we always had those. She kept them in the house, and she had a nursing home for a time as well. And she was interested in these people, the ones that didn't have anything, the ones they would send to the county home like me. They didn't have any, they had no money to get any help, and she took care of these people. Now, you've heard, I don't know if you've heard, but maybe you've heard when somebody gets old, that person is talked about because when they got old, when they got demented, their behavior wasn't what one thought a person's behavior ought to be. Everybody becomes demented to some extent. Like you've seen the president, Biden, you've seen the extent that his dementia has taken over his character. Sometimes it's on, sometimes it's off. But oftentimes, if we look a little closer and see what good that these people have done in their life, if they've done good, I think of my mother as a case, because she wasn't a bad dementia, but in the end there, She had some characteristics that were pretty rotten. But in her life before that, she had done so much good for so many people, even me. She done good for. That's what ought to be judged. And that's why when these guys go into a trial, you have the same person being the prosecutor and the defense attorney. And everything is going to be laid on the table. And the judge, it's going to be judged, just like this book says, based on your works. It's a works righteousness judgment for those in the second and third class. It says it all over the place. It doesn't say much about being saved by grace, especially what they mean as saved today. Everywhere, and including this book, Gospel of John, every gospel, James, Jude, salvation is by works. So what does it mean to be saved if there's no works? I can't figure out why this minister today constantly talks about this once saved, always saved doctrine and picks out a few very general passages. And I don't mean to go into that, but I want you to understand that we need to have a little more emphasis on works righteousness, whether Martin Luther and Calvin liked it or not. And a great sign was seen in the sky. A woman surrounded or wrapped in the sun, and with the moon under her feet, and a crown with 12 stars on her head. Now, a crown and a diadem are two different things. A crown is a Stephanos. A crown is a big bejeweled sign of royalty. A diadem is a tiara, a little band with maybe a jewel or two in it, a little band. And who wore those, the tiaras, were the princes and princesses, the ones that were a little lower down. The king and queen wore the crowns. And so we're going to get, here it is actually in the next verse, diadem. So she has 12 stars on her head in a crown, and pregnant, in anguish to deliver, wailing, experiencing contractions. And another sign was seen in the sky, and look, a great red rubber dragon, having 7 heads, 10 horns, and on its heads 7 diadems. This is chapter 12. Chapter 13, it is revealed to us who this dragon is. That's the devil. He's experiencing life in the form of these other people, these beasts in these different heads. He's experiencing his life and doing his dirtiest with these rulers with the diadem on their head. And its tail is pulling down 1/3 of the stars from the sky, and it threw them into the ground. And the dragon took his stand in front of the woman. You see, here is an imitation of holiness, standing before Elohim and standing in front of this woman, this one about to deliver, so that it might eat up the little child when born. And she bore a son, a male, who was destined to be a herdsman with an iron rod to all countries. Now, herdsman, a lot of people call this a shepherd. It's a pieman. Simon the pieman. It's not quite a shepherd. The word for shepherd is pastor. a pieman. Look at the shepherd's job. He leads the sheep around, he protects the sheep, but this is also a person that opens and shuts gates. This is a person that can kill wild beasts. This is a person that goes way beyond our idea of the Jesus meek and mild, the shepherd. These guys were warriors, and they had to be because lions were in the land at that time, and who knows what else. Herdsmen with an iron rod to all countries. It gives us a little clue to Psalm 2, to look back in Psalm 2. And the child was seized up, raptured. This is an interesting find that I made today. I was thrilled. 14, seized up, the same word that has been translated rapture from Paul, 1 Thessalonians 4:17. Herpasthe. When Jerome translated the Greek Bible into Latin, he used the word rapeo. First session I mentioned this. Rapeo. It means to seize, but actually goes the whole gamut from seize to rape, means the same thing. So Jerome translated that word rapture. That's where we get it from. Herpasthe, herpasthe, that's it. It is not, it's not translated rapture. It's translated seized up. What I'm saying is that the Latin translation, rapture, is what everybody knows it as today. I don't know who uses Douay Rheims Bible. I think that that's based on the Vulgate, Jerome's Vulgate translation from way back in the 5th century. Or there's a few other Catholic Bibles that might do that. But if you talk about the seizure, nobody knows what you're talking about. Even the movies about the rapture are called rapture rather than anything else. But that word could mean the rape. It's a violent kind of word. So Paul doesn't use a Latin word, rapio. He uses this. But I was so surprised to see that in there and kind of happy because I made a big change in the last few years in my thinking about the rapture. I've always been dead set against that it was a myth, etc. Not anymore. Not anymore. Here, when we have, I've lost it again. Where's that word? Here it is. The child was seized up, not by the dragon. He was seized up. Now, it talks about other children after this. And it became obvious to me that the 144,000 were also seized up. Yeshua was seized up. The 2 witnesses are seized up at that time. A lot of people were seized up, a lot of them, but not myriads of them. He says 144,000, not the ones crying out salvation at the end of chapter 7, not those, just this 144,000. No, I don't think that's a literal number. It's got too much significance in its factors. 12 times 12 times 1,000. 1,000 means a good-sized chunk. If it said 10,000, that would be more. If it said myriads, that would be a lot more. Yahshua himself only had to call 1,000 angels. And again, I mentioned that the quintilioi, the millennium, the word is not a millennium, it's millenniums. There are more than one in that millennium passage. Millenniums. And you might remember John and I had a little go around about that. I can only tell you what it says. He's probably right, though. He's probably talking about 1,000-year period, because that is what the prophecy of the 7 days, 8 days is based on, 1,000 each. So he's raptured up to Elohim, toward his throne. And the woman fled into the desert, to where she has a place prepared there by the Elohim, so that they might take care of her there for 1,260 days. Cool. We've got about another paragraph here before I get into Pella. We have plenty of time. 7, the scene changes. There was war in the sky. Michael and his messengers must make war with the dragon, and the dragon made war, his messengers also. And it hadn't the might. There was no place found for them in the sky anymore. I think what they're talking about is in the atmosphere. I mean, if Josephus sees all this stuff happening up here, and all kinds of prodigies are happening, and earthquakes, and they did happen. They certainly did happen, according to his eyewitness testimony, the man who didn't know Revelation, we think, the man who he's thought by many people today to have written it, Josephus. How can these things be so close together? Only those that don't have any sense think they're not. So that they might take care of her for 1,260 days, war in the sky, must make war. And the dragon made war, the messengers, but it hadn't the might. No places found them for them in the sky anymore. And Michael at that time took over the sky. I'm not so sure that that's still the case now. And the great dragon was cast out, the ancient serpent called Diabolos and Satana or Satania, who led astray the entire population. It was thrown into the ground, and its messengers thrown down with it. Spelling error. Yeah, I want to stop there and go somewhere else. Talk about Pella now. It's a good place to make a little bit of cut. Here we go. And just, read along with me, if you will. This is a very, very important section. If you want to verify the Olivet discourse of Matthew 24 and what Yeshua says, and in Luke chapter 19, and in Mark chapter 13, and in Paul in both the Thessalonians. And by the way, First Thessalonians is the earliest of all the New Testament texts. First Thessalonians, so you're getting something early there. It's also where you find the pronunciation of Yeshua's name. In there is First Thessalonians 1, 2. Go take a look sometime. It's there. Flight to Pella refers to the event in early Christian history Why did I write that there? Were members of the Jerusalem assembly or ecclesia or kahal or idah, particularly Jewish Christians, that's good, fled the city of Jerusalem before its destruction by the Romans in 70 CE. I thought a lot about the believers that were in there that did or did not go up in a rapture. There had to have been some. And if there was a rapture, and if they were witnesses to this, and they didn't go, well, most certainly they would become believers then. No doubt about it. Perhaps you watched some of those old movies the Assembly of God put out where all of a sudden the rapture happens and girlfriend's gone up in the air and a boyfriend and a wife leaving somebody behind there. And the person behind always says, well, she told me so much about this, but I didn't believe. In the movie, oh, we teenagers, some older than that, were really affected by this. So the effect was good, though. You know, we some of them would end up on the floor of the church on their knees. And at that time in the assemblies of God, it wasn't just a matter of once saved, always saved. You towed the line in the assemblies, not so much these days. According to early church tradition, they escaped to the city of Pella, located in the Decapolis region of the Roman province of Perea, which is in modern-day Jordan, outside of Israel, unless they've annexed that. I got some pictures, and we'll come back to this text. This is the Pella region now. Ruins back here, and hills. I wouldn't call them mountains, but this place is surrounded by hills like this. However, they had more caves. It was caves that the believers fled Jerusalem and found here in this place. This was a hostile place for them, unless maybe the Pellaites had made their peace with the Nazarenes in this town, because we are told in the history that the Greeks came against the Jews here in Pella and massacred them. So it could be either that when those from Jerusalem came over there, how they got there is a miracle in itself, but maybe they had some friends there that could put them up, but probably not. They probably had to find a place to go there, and maybe they were stuck there because of the Roman armies that were still up there roving around, and there were the caves. And so the latest theory is that they went into the caves, and nobody even in the town knew they were there. There's some evidence for that too. Go down to a map. I wrote a story about this, the Nazarenes fleeing Jerusalem and how it came about. I might even have time to put that over to you because it's good, gives you more of an idea what was going on in this place with all these miracles and stuff. These are the caves. Get the map first. Yeah, good. You can always find Pella on a map because we have Jerusalem down here and we got Damascus up here, and right in the middle, where are you? About in the middle here. If you go down a line from one to the other, you're going to go through Pella. And again, check it out. It's on the east side of the Jordan River. This is in the place called the Decapolis, The gospel calls it the 10 towns. This was not Jewish territory. This is where in Gadara, for instance, and in Gerasa, that they herded pigs, and where the pigs went off down the ditch. This is there. And where there were madmen, well, one gospel says Gadara, the other one says Gerasa. There were two of them, two demoniacs that knew who Yeshua was. Because the first thing they say coming out, they hail him as their master. They're under the influence of the demons and they hail him and say, help me, help me, help me. And maybe it's the demons that are sending them toward him, but I think that they were seeking him out. And he did what needed to be done. What would we do if a mad person come after us like that? Better be ready. That might be the work of your life, honestly. So there's the map. Pella, Scythopolis, now that's called Beth Shean. They found a stela or a stela of, who was it? Pontius Pilate there. Now they know that he's real. Nazareth up north, this is Galilee up here. I think that's the last picture. All right, so this is the Pella hinterland. And they found some stuff here. I didn't get the essay out that I have on this, but I just wanted to show you caves. And they suspected that there were people living down here, but it was collapsed. They couldn't get in there. And this whole cave was collapsed. And niches, I believe what that's referring to are what archaeologists call kokava. Niche in a wall holding an ossuary, a bone box with somebody's remains in it. I think that's what they mean by niches. They could be shelves. I don't know. Why would they put them on here? So that's enough of a challenge for us to try to find out who it was staying in these caves. And a pillar. That's a man-made setup there. More niches here. There's a great article on this from Biblical Archaeology Society that I have it. If you want it, let me know. Send me a note or something. It's something you would like to listen to, I think, or read. I think I've got a couple of, I have a couple of podcasts about this too. I just love this whole idea here. I know. I'm a little over the top. And I want to read through this text with you so I know you get it. And everybody calls it, that knows anything about it, flight to Pella. Refers to the event in early Nazarene history where members of the Yerushalayim assembly, particularly Jewish Messianics, fled the city of Jerusalem before its destruction by the Romans in 70. I think I know exactly when this happened. According to early church tradition, they escaped to the city of Pella, located in the Decapolis region of the Roman province of Perea, Jordan now. We're part of Jordan. All right, we know about the Jewish war. A lot of tensions. Really, it was a religious war because the ones that started it probably started were the Zealots when they took off General Kestius' army on its way from Jerusalem to Caesarea. And here's the assembly. We got church here. Jewish converts to Christianity. I just hate that. They were not converts to Christianity. They were converts to a new messiahism or a sect. James, the brother of Yeshua, last Shabbat, is traditionally considered the leader of this early Jewish group. The community adhered to Jewish traditions while also following the teachings of Yeshua, making them distinct within the broader Jewish population. Yes, they were sectarians. They were a cult, as we would say today. According to the early church tradition, the flight occurred sometime before the Roman siege of Jerusalem. Yes, genius. The exact timing is debated, but likely took place around 66 to 68 during the early stages of the Jewish revolt. You remember in the first session, we were talking about Jerusalem was at the beginning of this war surrounded by Roman armies and Syrian armies that were sent over there by the governor of Syria, who was also the general. And they surrounded Jerusalem and they were let in and they got inside. Their orders were to destroy the place. Hey, they got inside the walls. That army got in there. And for some reason, we don't know, he didn't fulfill his orders. Castius, yeah, that's his name. I can't remember his other name. That's what I call him anyway. Somehow he just left. He took his troops all with him to head back to Caesarea, which is the Roman headquarters for the legions. That's on the west coast of Israel, up a little ways, not far from Megiddo. And so on the way up there, I've told this story 5 times, the zealots are all set up along the road and picking these guys off. They were guerrilla fighters, freedom fighters, we might say today, and they picked the entire legions off. But the general, he survived. He survived. It wasn't a good thing. So the governor of the whole province was, I think that was Festus at that time, the festive guy, you know, the biggest crook, the bloodiest governor you can possibly imagine. And then there was the general. They got together and they went over there and left and got all picked off, though they survived to get to Caesarea. There's a little bit more to the story, and it's something that I had decided I wanted to share with you in a couple more, if we do any more, and that is Paul. What's Paul doing at this time? Well, he's not dead yet. This flight is going to be sometime, yes, between 66 and 68. Probably pretty much right after the Roman legions surround Jerusalem. Not only that, but the Roman legions built a fourth wall around the entire city, 11 miles out of wood. Where'd they get the wood? That's why Revelation is always talking about trees. They're not going to hurt any trees. You know, they cut all the trees down. What did Josephus say? There wasn't a tree within 11 miles, I think, 10 miles of Jerusalem anymore. Oh, let's see, what was I talking about? Oh, yeah. So these guys, Castius and Festus, both crying the blues. This is according to Josephus. That they called in Herod's friends, Herod's kinsmen, that is, Saulos and what's the other one's name? Costobarus, his brother, who were kinsmen of Herod. The New Testament tells us that Paul was a Herodian. I think he was proud of it. He talked about it all the time. He tells us in Romans chapter 16 that he's a Herodian, that is a kinsman to Herod the king. And if we search out his genealogy, he certainly is. We know right where he is placed. He's the grandson of the sister of King Herod the Great. Shalom Zion was her name, a very powerful woman and rich. So we see Paul as the Herodian, and we see now how he fits into the story. Castius and Festus called on Paul and his brother as Herodians. I was reading today Acts 25 and 26, where we have Paul standing there with a governor, and we've got Festus there, and we have his cousin, Bernice, the princess of Zion, the sister of King Agrippa II. They all know each other. They're talking quite conventionally with each other. And it's very obvious that they knew each other and probably pretty well. You know, Paul's being accused by some Jews of being a heretic. And so he's to go up to Rome because he said, I am a Roman citizen. I will appeal to Caesar. And who is Caesar at that time but Nero? So look what happens after. They call on Paul, these guys that just botched up destroying Jerusalem on the first time over there. And they told Paul, I guess they probably gave him a choice because Paul had such a reputation by this time, to go on their behalf to Nero, who was doing a concert throughout Greece, Achaia. Nero was on the road with his, what did I call that thing? Now I can't remember. Not a lute. It's gone now, but he's on the road up there and enjoying himself, winning every contest, taking anything he wants from the theaters and from the different places and from the museums and all, getting that stuff all loaded up. And here comes Paul. No notice. And what Paul is supposed to do is straighten it out for Festus and for Castius. That was his mission. First, he had to go to Caesarea and talk to some people. Now, where are you going to Nero? So Paul doesn't say whether he went or not, but look what happened. Right after this, right after, both of these men died. Both of them died. Castius, Festus, they just kicked over and died. I think Festus was married to Agrippa's sister, Bernice, if I'm not mistaken. Titus tried to marry her, the general. Everyone loved her. She must have been very seductive and very rich. And so did Paul go or did he not? Paul, it's said in the tradition, died at the same time. All three of these guys, all three of them at the same time, after Josephus talks about these governors sending Paul to Greece to bother the crazy Nero on his concert tour. I just found that out this week, digging through stuff. I know it's really no big deal, but it is to me. Wow. What happened to Paul? What if he did go to Achaia? What if he did go to Nero? He wanted to see Nero so bad. Nero probably knew him because if you remember, Seneca, who was the guardian of Nero, gave Nero Paul's letters. Seneca had him. He was a friend with Paul. He tells us in the letters that he's reading these letters to the emperor and to her wife, his wife. And he says they're not really very well disposed of them. In the next letter, Seneca says, you better go hide someplace. Wow. Why can't we read about this? I guess nobody really cares about it anymore. Where am I? Oh, I got a little time left. Let's see if there's anything worth going to here. All right, yeah. The motivation for the flight was likely a combination of prophetic warnings and the practical need to escape the impending destruction of the city. Many early Nazarenes believed that Yeshua had foretold the destruction of Jerusalem. And it says, as recorded in the Synoptic Gospels, Matthew 24, 15 through 21, which we read really at the top of this whole thing. And this prophecy may have been a key factor in their decision to flee. I should say the door was open. Didn't our master tell us to get out of here when this place is surrounded by armies? Wasn't it just surrounded? And we didn't get massacred? Don't you think this is going to happen again when Nero finds out about it? Absolutely. They came in and crushed the whole place. It already crushed all of Israel. Wow. So Pella is a city. Oh, we looked at that. Located across the Jordan. It says the choice might have been influenced by its relative safety from the conflict zones and its location in a predominantly Gentile area, which may have offered protection from the hostilities directed at Jews during the revolt. It says plainly in the history that the Greeks of Pella, they massacred all the Jews there. So I don't think it was a place without its own problem, but I think maybe they got there, and they might have got there during this massacre. They might have got there when Vespasian was tearing the place down, and they found caves and just stayed there. But because what I know is the Nazarenes came back to Jerusalem when the dust has settled, and they weren't thrown out. They could come back. It was the next revolt that the Emperor Trajan didn't allow Jews to go back to that town, changed the name of the town, built a temple to Jupiter where the Temple Mount was. No Jews allowed. But they came back now and they begin their ministry again. They just weren't as big, or they didn't have the power that the Pharisees had, who were working with the Romans. So it's the Pharisees that survived right on up until today.
Brother Jackson, can I ask a question?
Sure.
So you're saying that not all the believers were raptured at that time, and why wouldn't all of them be raptured? Were they like?
Well, if it is, if literally they had never been with women, these guys were married. They were married. A lot of them, I imagine, they were not set aside in that way. I guess we go back and look and see the 144,000. But in speaking of this, talking to others in the past, they put up a pretty tough goal for the saints, the Kadoshim, to cross, to become like this. Now, I know people today say, well, that's all symbolic, but I'm not so sure. I'm not so sure. Take a look. Hold just a second. Excuse me. See if I can get it up here quick. Yes, I can.
A lot of them were martyred too, weren't they? They were
Oh,
martyred.
they were all martyred as far as we know. They had to die first. Okay, let's see if I can see what the qualifications were. Angels, angels, angels. Okay. And I heard the number of those having been sealed, 144,000, having been sealed out of every tribe of the sons of Israel, out of the tribe of Yehuda, etc., etc., etc. Let's get down to the end of that. And then we have the great multitude. Well, I can't think of where that is right now. We're told where Elohim is talking about these are virgins who never have been with a woman. That wouldn't be so strange, really. A lot of people at that time were chaste on account of their faith. There was a big chastity movement came along right after Paul because the people of the Nazarenes and the Ebionites especially, they saw Paul as teaching no marriage, chastity, that marriage was a sin, and especially if you were called into the ministry of priests like James was. Yeshua, he didn't marry. Kipha did marry. The other brothers probably did, of Yeshua, according to 1 Corinthians 9. But I don't see right here.
Revelations 14:3 talks about
Okay,
some of the qualifications.
14.
I'm sorry, not three. These are 4. 14:4.
Okay, great. Thank you. I want to see again myself. These are they, hoi, the ones who with women not have been defiled. Molun. All right, that word there is, I want to look at that again. Defiled. All right, the only place that's found in the entire New Testament. Amolu. Is there in Revelation 14. Pure, for I don't like that word have been defiled. A woman does not defile a man, or a man can probably defile a woman, but this is a particular type of woman, it sounds like to me. Like a harlot or a prostitute, but they're both men and women prostitutes at that time. They'll just say they were not defiled. Pure, they are pure. Parthenoi, that means they are virgins. Speaking of real virgins. For they are these following the Lamb wherever he shall go. I guess they emulated his life. And if you take a look at the story Paul and Thecla, it's one of those persecution stories. You'll see that how Paul's life and words were twisted around, that many people believed that they were not to get married, that they broke their engagements. Wives and husbands split, and they called off any kind of contact with the opposite sex, Paul and Thecla. And there's also a couple of letters that are assigned to Paul. I don't know whether they are or not, but there's one, a letter to Titus on chastity. Those were big. They were very popular. So I guess I thought when I started reading this back when I was a young kid, I thought, well, who could do that? Who could be that? No children, but these are following the Lamb. They're redeemed out from men as first fruits. And there wasn't a lie found in them. Well, if that was the case, I'd never make it in that. A pseudos, it means a false thing. Blameless they are, and then before the throne of the Elohim. So I guess one thing to know, the great movement towards chastity, especially go to the Nazarene Acts if you got that. In volume 3, Peter and Paul in Rome, there are a number of stories of women who got on this kick. They were religious, but their husband wasn't religious, and they cut or cuckolded the husband until he reformed. So they cut the husband off. Hey, you're not coming anywhere near me until you do this. Polish your shoes before church. Yeah, so, oh, well, let's think about that more because that's definitely a difficulty. Do I have any time left? Okay, well, next time I would like to give you some historic fiction that I wrote some years ago in regards to Jerusalem and the Nazarenes during this time, right after Jerusalem was surrounded by armies.